Awaken your spirit chosen ones. Every warning is a deadline in disguise. Ignore it, and the clock stops negotiating. Ever notice how history is basically a highlight reel of people who thought the rules didn't apply to them? From empires that believed they were bulletproof to CEOs who laughed at regulations, the pattern is the same. Ignore the caution tape. Meet the demolition crew. And here's a fact to chew on while you side-eye your own decisions. In behavioral psychology, people consistently underestimate the cost of defiance, yet over 70% admit they only change course after a personal crisis. Translation? Most of us wait for the cosmic frying pan to the head before we realize the stove was hot. Today we're talking about the chosen ones, who heard the divine "stay in your lane" memo and still floored the accelerator. They treated prophecy like spam email, delete, 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 and now the universe is bouncing the check with interest. Think of it as spiritual physics. You can question gravity all you like, but if you swan dive off the balcony, gravity's not going to debate you. So buckle in. We're about to peel back the velvet curtain on what really happens when someone mistakes a holy boundary for a polite suggestion, and why the fallout isn't just punishment, it's poetic engineering with a wicked sense of timing. And yes, we might laugh along the way, because sometimes the only thing sharper than cosmic justice is the irony that comes with it. Number 1. Sacred warnings are not suggestions means more than a dramatic phrase. It's a blunt truth about how the world actually works. A warning that comes from a higher order, whether you call it God, fate, or the hard wiring of reality, isn't a polite heads up. It's structural. It's the equivalent of a bridge engineer saying, "The steel is cracking." You can shrug, you can laugh, but the bridge doesn't care. It will collapse on schedule if you keep driving. People often treat spiritual cautions like advice columns, nice to read, easy to ignore. They confuse divine patience with unlimited tolerance. But patience is just the gap between signal and consequence, a gap meant to give you time to correct course. The moment you choose to treat that gap as proof nothing will happen, you start setting the trap for yourself. It's not that some angry force is waiting to zap you, it's that you are stepping outside the pattern that keeps everything coherent. Reality has its own non-negotiable operating system. History is full of leaders, prophets, and everyday people who heard a clear stop sign and charged ahead anyway. Their downfall rarely looked supernatural. It came as coincidences, a sudden scandal, a quiet implosion of relationships, a health collapse that seemed random. Those accidents are often the plain mechanics of a world correcting imbalance. Gravity doesn't punish, it just pulls. Sacred law works the same way. What makes this so gripping is that no amount of charisma, intelligence, or hustle can outmaneuver it. You can be brilliant, adored, and resourceful, but if you keep violating a boundary that was never up for debate, your own gifts eventually turn against you. Talent amplifies the damage because it gives you more speed heading toward the wall. And that's the unsettling brilliance of a true warning. It doesn't come to scare you, it comes to spare you. Dismissing it isn't rebellion, it's self-sabotage. The longer you keep treating a divine caution like background noise, the more the world silently rewrites the terms of your life until the crash feels inevitable. By the time the ground gives way, you'll realize no one punished you. You simply declined the only offer of protection you were ever going to get. Number 2. Defiance breeds its own gravity. Speaks to the quiet way stubbornness creates a force field around a person. At first, breaking a rule or ignoring a clear warning feels like a small act of independence. You get a rush of freedom, the sense that you've outsmarted the system. But every repeated act of defiance carries weight, like tiny fragments of metal collecting around a magnet. One choice doesn't seem to matter. 10 choices later, you've built a pull so strong it starts to steer your life even when you think you're in control. This isn't superstition. It's cause and effect. The more someone rejects guidance, the more they invest in proving themselves right. Pride takes over. Soon they can't turn back without admitting everything up to now was a mistake, and that pride is heavy. It drags them toward the very outcome they wanted to avoid. Friends might warn them, opportunities to correct course might appear, but the inner gravity of defiance makes every lifeline feel like an insult. They double down instead of turning around. What's striking is how ordinary this process looks from the outside. Careers stall, relationships sour, health frays. It doesn't have to be dramatic to be destructive. People say life just happened, but most of the time, it's the slow orbit they built themselves. The universe doesn't need to punish. The momentum of repeated arrogance does the work. Defiance starts as a single decision and hardens into a personal atmosphere you carry everywhere. The danger is that gravity is patient. It doesn't force a sudden collapse. It keeps tugging inch by inch until escape becomes nearly impossible. By the time someone senses the pull, they're already circling the black hole. Every attempt to break free feels like wading through wet cement, and the habits that created the pull are the same ones making it harder to change. That's why a warning isn't just about avoiding trouble in the moment. It's about stopping that first bit of mass from gathering, because once the orbit begins, the outcome isn't a random strike of bad luck. It's the natural consequence of the field you built with every defiant step. And gravity, once set in motion, never negotiates. Number 3. The universe keeps receipts is a blunt reminder that nothing we do, good or bad, vanishes into thin air. Every choice leaves a mark somewhere, whether anyone sees it or not. We like to think of life as a series of isolated moments, but actions have a way of echoing long after we forget them. A cutting remark, a hidden betrayal, a selfish decision made when we thought no one was watching. Each of these is a line in a ledger we can't shred. This isn't about a cosmic accountant with a clipboard. It's about the natural memory of reality. People sense it when karma shows up, or when consequences land years later in ways too specific to be coincidence. Energy moves in loops. If you create harm, that pattern keeps traveling until it circles back. You might outrun human judgment, but you can't outrun the quiet math of cause and effect. Even when the world seems to have moved on, the residue of what you set in motion keeps building interest. What makes this law unnerving is how subtle it can be. The receipt might arrive as a lost opportunity you never knew you missed, a sudden reversal of fortune, or a strange tension that shadows your success. It rarely looks like the thunderbolt people imagine. Often it feels like life simply tipping the scale to even things out. And it's not just about punishment, it's about balance. When you cheat that balance, the universe doesn't need to rage. It just recalibrates until everything lines up again. The same principle works in the other direction. Acts of integrity, kindness, and courage leave records too. They can surface years later as unexpected help, a chance meeting, or a door opening when you least expect it. The ledger is neutral. It doesn't favor saints or villains. It simply reflects what's been deposited. Ignoring this reality is dangerous because it breeds a false sense of immunity. You might get away with something today and tomorrow and next year, but every choice is a seed, and seeds don't care how long you've forgotten about them. Sooner or later, the harvest arrives. When it does, it's not fate being cruel, it's just the universe cashing in a bill you wrote with your own hand. Number 4. Power without reverence, self-destructs, captures a truth many people only learn after they've climbed high enough to see the drop. Power, whether it's money, influence, talent, or raw charisma, can push through almost any barrier. It opens doors, silences critics, and bends circumstances to your will. But if that power isn't anchored in something bigger than ego, it starts to corrode from the inside. Without a sense of awe, gratitude, or recognition of limits, strength turns reckless. It stops being a tool and becomes a weapon pointed at its owner. Reverence isn't about religious ritual. It's about remembering that power is borrowed, not owned. Every skill, connection, or stroke of luck that got you ahead came from a web of forces larger than you, people who helped, moments of timing you didn't control, the sheer physics of being alive. Forgetting that truth is like building a skyscraper on sand. It might look solid for a while, but the foundation is already cracking. History offers endless evidence. Leaders who believed their own hype, innovators who thought they were untouchable, artists who mistook applause for invincibility, all eventually faced the quiet rebellion of reality. Their brilliance didn't simply fade, it imploded. Relationships disintegrated, empires collapsed, creative gifts dried up. The collapse rarely came from outside enemies, it came from unchecked pride turning every advantage into a liability. The irony is that reverence isn't weakness, it's protection. It keeps ambition sharp but grounded, reminding you that limits aren't cages but guardrails. When you stay aware of something greater, call it God, destiny, or the intricate order of life, you treat power as a responsibility instead of a throne. That awareness tempers decisions, slows the reckless impulse, and keeps you from burning the very fuel that sustains you. Power without that humility behaves like a star exhausting its core. At first it shines brighter, feeding on its own heat. Then, without warning, it collapses and destroys itself in the process. People watching call it a tragedy or a scandal, but it's really a natural law at work. Strength without reverence doesn't just fade, it detonates, taking with it the very brilliance that once lit the way. Number 5. Consequences don't knock, they enter is a plain-spoken law of life that too many people learn the hard way. Warnings, whether they come from a friend, a gut feeling, or something you'd call divine, are the only grace period you'll ever be given. After that, reality doesn't waste time with gentle follow-ups. It moves in without announcing itself, and it starts rearranging everything you thought was secure. We like to believe trouble shows up with flashing lights, giving us a chance to brace or negotiate. But real consequences work differently. They're silent until the very moment they're not. One day the job is gone, the relationship is over, the body is failing, the reputation is shredded. There's rarely a dramatic drum roll, just a sudden shift from normal to too late. That shift is so jarring because we keep assuming we'll get a final warning, some audible knock to signal the storm. But the only knock was the first one, and we ignored it. This isn't about fate being cruel. It's about how cause and effect actually functions. Choices accumulate like hidden interest. Each reckless decision is a signature on a contract you don't realize you're signing. When the terms mature, the outcome isn't an attack. It's a payout of everything you agreed to in pieces. By then, the time for explanation or bargaining is gone. What makes this truth feel almost ruthless is that it's entirely impersonal. Reality doesn't hold grudges or play favorites. If you gamble with your health, your finances, your integrity, the bill arrives exactly on schedule. No matter how charming or well-intentioned you were, that's why the warning itself is the real gift. It's the only moment where choice exists. After that, the process runs like gravity, steady, unstoppable, indifferent to how surprised you are. Understanding this changes how you hear every caution in your life. Instead of brushing off the first sign as overreaction, you recognize it as the only pause you're going to get. Consequences don't politely announce their arrival. They're already standing in your hallway, ready to rearrange the furniture of your life. The warning was the doorbell. Everything after is simply the house being remodeled, whether you wanted it or not. Number 6. Spiritual law outranks personal talent is the kind of statement that cuts through ego like a blade. Talent, whether it's the brilliance of a strategist, the voice of an artist, or the influence of a leader, feels like something you own. You practice, you hustle, you build a reputation, and it's easy to believe that your gifts are permanent extensions of you. But every ability is borrowed. The spark that makes you extraordinary comes from a deeper current, and that current has its own rules. Those rules aren't religious fine print. They're the unseen architecture that keeps life balanced. Call it spiritual law, universal order, or the moral gravity of the world. Ignore it, and no amount of genius can shield you. History is filled with people who thought their gifts placed them above consequence. Their skills didn't vanish overnight, but the harmony that made those skills powerful did. Audiences turned cold, opportunities dried up, creativity dulled, or health failed. It wasn't random bad luck. It was the source reclaiming what it had only loaned. This isn't punishment, it's balance. A gift misused or hoarded against its purpose eventually stops flowing. Charisma that manipulates instead of uplifts becomes transparent. Intelligence used to deceive ends up building traps for the one who set them. The law isn't petty, it's precise. If your talent runs against the current that gave it life, the current pulls it back. Even natural effort can't outwork that principle. You can rehearse until dawn, Network with every power broker and still find doors closing if the foundation of your gift has drifted off course. Sometimes the withdrawal is dramatic, a public collapse. More often it's quiet, a slow dimming of energy, the inspiration that once came easily now arriving as static. Understanding this changes how you hold your abilities. It invites humility, not fear. Instead of clutching your talent as a possession, you treat it as stewardship. You align it with something larger, service, truth, creation, rather than destruction. That alignment keeps the current alive. Because at the end of the day, the source that lent the spark always retains the right to reclaim it. Talent can open doors, but only respect for the... Number 7. Misused freedom is a slow suicide is a harsh but necessary truth about how we handle the gift of choice. Freedom is powerful because it means you can shape your own life. You can take risks, build dreams, walk away from what traps you. But the same freedom that lets you grow can quietly destroy you if every decision feeds impulse instead of wisdom. Each careless move is like taking a small withdrawal from the savings account of your own future, and the balance runs out faster than you think. The danger hides in the pace. When people picture self-destruction, they imagine something sudden and dramatic, a single catastrophic event. In reality, the damage is gradual. One ignored warning, one indulgence you know you can't afford, one compromise that chips away at your integrity. None of it looks fatal in the moment, but every just this once is a micro-cut to your vitality, the physical, mental, and spiritual strength you'll need later. Freedom becomes toxic when it turns into entitlement. You start believing every desire deserves a yes, that limits are an insult instead of a safeguard. At first it feels like liberation. Late nights, reckless spending, relationships you know are corrosive, shortcuts that look clever. But the cost compounds. Energy drains, trust erodes, purpose blurs. The very autonomy you prized starts to shrink because you've weakened the self that freedom was meant to serve. What makes this even more sobering is that the world rarely intervenes. Society often rewards the early stages of reckless freedom with applause, living your best life, being fearless. But nature doesn't clap. It calculates. Health issues, emotional burnout, lost opportunities, and fractured relationships arrive like invoices. By the time the toll is obvious, it's no longer about a few bad nights or small missteps. It's about a life running on overdraft. True freedom demands discipline, not constant indulgence. It's the ability to say no to what will drain you later, to honor the future self you haven't met yet. Without that discipline, freedom turns on its owner. The suicide is slow, but it's certain, because the very choices meant to express your independence end up dismantling the person who was supposed to enjoy it. Number 8. Ego as an uninsured driver captures how pride can take the wheel and steer a life straight into disaster. Ego isn't confidence. It's the inflated sense that you're special enough to bend every rule, that consequences are for other people. When ego takes over, it acts like a driver with no insurance, reckless, impatient, blind to risk, and convinced that skill alone will keep the ride smooth. It might feel thrilling for a while, but every mile builds a hidden debt. Ego feeds on the illusion of control. It whispers that you're too smart to fail, too charming to lose friends, too talented to need advice. Under that spell, caution signs look like decorations instead of warnings. You push limits at work, in relationships with your health or money, telling yourself the usual fallout can't touch you. Each time you get away with it, the lie feels more true. But what you're really doing is driving without coverage. There's no protection when reality finally demands payment. The crash rarely arrives as a single dramatic event. More often, it's a slow sequence of dents. Trust erodes. Opportunities vanish. People stop giving second chances. By the time the real collision comes, a lost career, a public humiliation, a private breakdown, you've already burned through every layer of grace that might have softened the blow. And just like an uninsured accident, the costs are entirely yours. No one is coming to bail you out because the safety net you assumed would catch you was never there. What makes ego so dangerous is that it masquerades as strength. It tells you humility is weakness and accountability is optional. In truth, humility is the insurance. It's the policy that keeps you teachable, that slows you down when the road gets slick, that lets you admit a wrong turn before you're too far gone. Without it, every victory is a temporary high with a built-in expiration date. Driving with ego feels fast and fearless, but the freedom is an illusion. The road is long, the odds are merciless, and sooner or later, reality stops traffic with no warning. When that moment comes, there's no claim to file and no coverage to lean on, only the hard cost of every risk you refuse to respect. Number 9. Silence of the divine is not absence, speaks to a tension many people misunderstand. When the voice of warning fades, it can feel like relief. No more inner alarms, no more nudges from conscience, no more people showing up to tell you to stop. But that quiet is rarely approval. Often it's the most serious signal you'll ever get because it marks the shift from invitation to consequence. At first, divine silence can be deceptive. You keep making the same choices, and nothing obvious happens. No lightning bolt, no sudden collapse. You start to think the danger was exaggerated. That sense of false safety is part of the test. The silence is giving you space to confront yourself without the drama of constant correction. It's the final courtesy before reality does what reality always does. Balance the scales. What's striking is that the silence doesn't mean abandonment. It's not that the source of those earlier warnings has vanished. It's that the process has changed. Instead of tugging at your sleeve, the universe steps back and lets the chain reaction unfold. The laws that govern cause and effect don't need commentary. Gravity doesn't argue with a falling object. Once the pattern is set, it carries itself to completion. People often confuse this phase with triumph. They double down on the very behavior that invited the warnings because they assume the quiet means consent. But the absence of friction is sometimes the sign that the runway has ended. Relationships, health, reputation, and inner peace can all unravel with no obvious link to the earlier choices, yet the connection is precise. The axe doesn't swing out of spite, it simply finishes the work that defiance began. This perspective reframes what silence really is, not comfort, but a countdown. The period when mercy steps aside isn't cruel, it's honest. It allows the consequences to speak in a language no sermon or dream could match. By the time the noise returns, it's usually the sound of impact, not a gentle reminder. Recognizing this truth is a kind of protection. When the inner or outer warnings go dark, that's the moment to turn back fastest, not slow down. Because divine silence isn't absence, it's the stillness before reality delivers the lesson in full. Number 10. Spiritual physics has no loopholes is the clearest way to describe how the deeper laws of existence work. Just as gravity doesn't pause to check whether you meant to trip, the unseen principles that keep life in balance operate with the same cold precision. Intention, ignorance, or personal charm don't buy you a free pass. Step outside the order that sustains you, and the result is automatic. Many people secretly believe their circumstances or motives grant them exceptions. They think a good heart will neutralize a reckless decision, or that not knowing a rule erases its effect. But the universe isn't a courtroom where you can argue your case. It's a system of cause and effect woven so tightly that every action is an input with a guaranteed output. You don't have to believe in these laws any more than you have to believe in gravity for it to pull you down. This is why spiritual traditions across cultures warn about alignment rather than excuses. They teach that life has a moral and energetic architecture. Honesty sustains trust, gratitude expands capacity, greed breeds scarcity, cruelty ricochets back. These aren't threats, they're descriptions of how reality distributes consequence. Ignore them, and you don't just break a rule, you collide with structure itself. The striking part is how neutral it all is. The laws aren't vengeful, they're consistent. A child can fall off a ledge as surely as a criminal. A well-meaning person who misuses power can suffer fallout just like someone who set out to harm. The outcome isn't about deserving, it's about mechanics. What makes this principle both sobering and empowering is that it strips away the illusion of special status. Wealth, talent, spiritual titles, none of it bends the equation. If you sow chaos, chaos grows. If you nurture integrity, stability follows. Life doesn't audit your intentions, it registers your actions and delivers their natural result. Accepting that truth can feel harsh at first, but it's liberating. It means you don't have to fear randomness or wonder if the universe is playing favorites. The pattern is dependable. Stay aligned and you flow with the current. Defy it and you face the exact consequences you set in motion. No loopholes, no appeal, just the steady, unblinking law of spiritual physics. Number 11. Mocking the sacred invites precision hits. Reveals a pattern that is as unnerving as it is consistent. When someone treats what is deeply revered, whether it's faith, fundamental values, or the quiet dignity of another person's belief, as a punchline or a target, the backlash rarely comes as vague bad luck. The response often lands with an almost surgical accuracy, striking the very place that arrogance first displayed itself. This isn't about a vengeful deity waiting to punish jokes. It's about the way reality reflects energy back to its source. When you belittle something that many hold as holy, you're not just being edgy, you're destabilizing the unseen agreements that give life coherence. That destabilization doesn't explode randomly. It's as though the universe highlights the exact blind spot that led to the mockery and presses there until the lesson is undeniable. History is filled with people who made sport of the sacred, leaders who ridiculed moral limits, artists who confused shock value with depth, influencers who taunted traditions for clicks. The hits that followed weren't always dramatic lightning strikes. They were often eerily tailored, careers imploding from the very arrogance they celebrated, reputations undone by the same weapon of ridicule they once wielded, personal crises that exposed the emptiness behind their performance. The timing and symmetry of these collapses can feel almost scripted. The reason it feels so precise is that mocking what others hold sacred doesn't just offend, it reveals a fracture inside the mocker. It shows a need to dominate or diminish what they can't control. That fracture becomes a perfect pathway for consequence. The universe doesn't have to invent a punishment. It simply amplifies the internal weakness until it becomes visible to all. This principle isn't limited to religion. It applies to anything that carries deep meaning: justice, love, the earth itself. Treat those forces as toys, and the recoil often arrives through the very channels you exploited. The fallout may look poetic, but it's really the clean mathematics of cause and effect. Disrespect creates instability, and instability always finds the shortest route home. That's why the precision hit is so striking. It's not random cruelty. It's the world handing back an exact reflection of the disrespect that set everything in motion, proof that the sacred is never as powerless as mockery pretends. Number 12. Delay is the cruelest judgment, captures the quiet brutality of consequences that don't strike right away. When you make a harmful choice and nothing bad happens immediately, it feels like you've escaped. You breathe easier, maybe even laugh about how people warned you for nothing. But that delay isn't mercy. It's the setup for a lesson that cuts deeper than any quick punishment ever could. An instant backlash can teach and even redeem. You touch a hot stove, you yank your hand back, you remember not to do it again. But when the effect hides for months or years, the cost grows in silence. You build habits around the wrong path. You make plans on top of shaky ground. You start to believe the danger was imaginary. All the while, the consequences are quietly compounding, like interest on a debt you forgot you owed. The slow unraveling is what makes this judgment cruel. You don't just face the outcome, you have to live through the entire collapse. Relationships fray one thread at a time. Health breaks down cell by cell. The career you built on shortcuts begins to crumble from the inside while you keep smiling for the world. By the time you see the damage clearly, you're entangled in it. There's no simple fix, because the punishment has been woven into the fabric of your daily life. This kind of delayed reckoning also exposes character in a way quick pain never could. With an immediate blow, you can apologize, change direction, rebuild. But a slow consequence demands endurance and honesty. You have to wake up each day inside the results of your own decisions, knowing you can't fast forward the process. The very time that once felt like a blessing becomes a mirror you can't turn away from. And that is why delay feels harsher than any sudden strike. It's not an explosion you can point to. It's a season of quiet erosion where every comfort you took for granted slips out of reach. The lesson isn't just that actions have consequences, it's that the universe can teach through patience, making you inhabit every inch of the reality you once mocked. In that drawn-out silence, you finally hear the truth you ignored, because now it lives in the air around you. Number 13. What you despise becomes your teacher. Captures the strange symmetry of how life delivers its hardest lessons. The very thing you mock, dismiss, or fight against often ends up shaping you more than anything you willingly embrace. Boundaries you once called pointless, values you ridiculed as outdated, people or ideas you swore you'd never respect. Those are the exact forces that circle back and educate you through experience rather than theory. It starts with rejection. You see a rule, a principle, or a tradition, and decide it's beneath you. Maybe it feels restrictive, maybe it threatens your sense of freedom, or maybe you just don't like the authority it represents. So you break it, loudly or quietly, convinced you're proving your independence. For a while it might even feel like victory. Life goes on, no lightning bolts, no instant collapse. But each act of defiance plants a seed, and seeds take their time. Eventually the consequences arrive, not as random chaos, but as a tailor-made lesson. If you mocked commitment, you may face the pain of betrayal. If you dismissed honesty as weakness, you may be undone by deception, perhaps your own. If you ridiculed discipline, you may end up desperate for the stability you once scorned. The punishment isn't theatrical, it's precise. Life simply steers you into situations where the very principle you rejected becomes the only path forward. What makes this process powerful is that it bypasses argument. No sermon or lecture could convince you the way reality does. You don't just hear why the boundary mattered, you feel it. The suffering becomes a curriculum, each difficulty a chapter in a lesson you can't skip. The boundary you mocked reveals itself not as a cage, but as a guardrail you needed all along. This isn't cosmic revenge, it's education. Life doesn't waste pain, it uses it to reveal truths we refuse to learn any other way. By the end, the thing you despise stands before you not as an enemy, but as a teacher, and you recognize that the line you once crossed so casually was drawn for your protection. The irony is sharp. The lesson that finally sets you free is the one you swore you'd never need. Number 14. The final price is paid in identity speaks to the deepest loss a person can face. Money can be earned again, status can be rebuilt, even relationships can sometimes be mended. But when the self you once knew erodes, the cost is immeasurable. Identity is the quiet architecture of everything, your values, your memories, the way you know what matters and where you belong. When that foundation burns, you don't just lose things around you, you lose the coordinates of who you are. This unraveling rarely happens overnight. It begins when choices start to clash with core truths. Maybe it's a compromise you justified, a mask you wore too long, or a constant pursuit of power that demanded you mute your own conscience. At first, the changes are subtle. You tell yourself you're adapting, evolving, doing what's necessary. But every step away from your inner compass chips off a piece of the person you recognize. Over time, the reflection in the mirror still shows your face, but the eyes feel borrowed. The harshest part is how invisible this process can be to the outside world. You might keep the job, the applause, the social media shine. Friends may still call you successful. Yet inside, the landmarks of identity, integrity, purpose, self-respect start disappearing. You stop trusting your own judgment because you've ignored it too often. You feel restless even in victory because the you who wanted those wins is fading. When the full price finally comes due, it's not an external loss. It's the moment you realize you can't return to the person you abandoned. No amount of money or fame can buy back an unbroken sense of self. You can rebuild a career or a fortune, but you can't easily reconstruct the original alignment between your soul and your actions. That is the true bankruptcy, a life where your own name feels like a stranger's. This is why the cost of reckless choices is so high. It's not about punishment from outside forces. It's about the irreversible trade you make when you repeatedly betray what defines you. The world may never see the payment, but you feel it in every silent moment. Losing wealth hurts, losing reputation wounds, But losing the self that once gave those things meaning is the deepest debt a human being can ever owe. In the end, the path of defiance against warning, law, and natural order is never without cost. Every act of arrogance, every mocked boundary, every reckless step creates momentum that cannot be reversed. The universe doesn't negotiate, delay doesn't excuse, and silence is never consent. Power without reverence implodes, freedom misused erodes the self, and ego driving unchecked leaves nothing but wreckage in its wake. What you dismiss as irrelevant, trivial, or inconvenient eventually becomes the very force that shapes your life, teaching through precision, hits, slow unraveling, and unavoidable consequence. And the cruelest truth of all, by the time the lessons arrive, they often demand payment in the one currency you cannot borrow or replace: identity. Wealth can be regained, fame can be reconstructed, but the self you once recognized, aligned with truth and purpose, is gone if you traded it for defiance and impulse. Every warning ignored, every line crossed, every sacred principle ridiculed doesn't just invite punishment. It engineers a collapse so intimate, so tailored, that the only way forward is through the reckoning itself. Those who believe they can outrun the currents that created them, who treat the laws of life like suggestions, discover that reality doesn't need drama or judgment to teach. It simply recalibrates with a precision and inevitability that spares no one. And when all is said and done, the lessons are clear. Respect the boundaries you were given, honor the power you carry, and never mistake patience, silence, or opportunity for permission. Because in this world, defiance might feel like freedom, and arrogance might feel like strength. But the final truth is undeniable. Every choice leaves a mark, every step sets a trajectory, and the ultimate price is always paid in what matters most: the integrity, clarity, and identity of who you are. Ignore that, and even victory itself will feel hollow, because the self that could have held it is gone. If this breakdown hit differently and gave you a new perspective, don't just watch and scroll, make it count. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the deep dives that strip life down to its raw truths. Smash the like if it resonated with you, drop a comment to share your take or your own experiences, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Every action you take here isn't just support. It's part of the conversation we're building. Stay sharp, stay aware, and remember, some lessons don't knock twice. Stay awakened, chosen ones.